Imagine a war that spanned more than a century, one where a small nation stood its ground against one of the most powerful empires of its time. This was the Russia-Circassian War, a 152-year struggle between the Circassian people and the Russian Empire, a conflict that would shape the North Caucasus and resonate throughout history. But what drove this relentless conflict, and why did it last so long? Join us as we explore this monumental struggle. The Russia-Circassian War, which stretched from 1763 to 1864, was a brutal and protracted conflict. It was part of the Russian Empire's efforts to expand southward into the Caucasus region, where they encountered fierce resistance from the Circassians, an indigenous people with a proud and resilient culture. For 152 years, the Circassians defended their homeland through courage, determination, and guerrilla warfare, resisting the empire's attempts at domination. Ultimately, this war became one of history's longest, leaving deep scars and a tragic legacy that continues to shape Circassian identity, background, and origins of the conflict. To understand why the Russia-Circassian War began, we need to look at the broader geopolitical context of the 18th century. At this time, the Russian Empire, under leaders like Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, was rapidly expanding. They sought to secure their southern borders and gain access to warm water ports, making the Caucasus region strategically valuable. However, the Caucasus was a rugged land inhabited by fiercely independent tribes, including the Circassians, who had their own distinct language, customs, and social structures. The Russian Empire saw the Caucasus as an obstacle to its ambitions. Russian expansion southward met resistance from Circassian warriors determined to protect their lands. The Circassians, who lived in small, decentralized communities, were skilled in mountain warfare and practiced a code of honor that made surrender unthinkable. As the Russians moved into Circassian territories, the Circassians chose to resist, igniting a conflict that would last for more than a century. The early stages of the war. The Russia-Circassian War officially began in 1763, when Russian forces established military fortresses in the region, marking a clear sign of their intent to conquer. These early years saw the Russians building forts to secure their positions, while the Circassians launched raids to weaken their enemy. The mountainous terrain favored the Circassians, allowing them to use guerrilla tactics, ambushing Russian troops and disappearing into the dense forests and rugged hills. The Circassians were at a disadvantage in terms of resources and manpower. However, their familiarity with the terrain and commitment to independence allowed them to resist effectively. At first, the Russian Empire underestimated the difficulty of subduing the Circassians. But as the conflict dragged on, the Russians realized that they were facing a deeply determined and skilled opponent. The role of Shamil and Circassian resistance. One of the most significant leaders in the Caucasian resistance was Imam Shamil, a Muslim leader who unified various Caucasian groups, including the Chechens and Dagestanis, against Russian expansion. Although Shamil was not Circassian, his struggle against Russian forces inspired the Circassians and boosted the broader resistance movement across the Caucasus. Shamil's leadership provided a strategic vision and organization that made it even harder for the Russian Empire to subdue the region. For the Circassians, the war became not only about defending their land, but also about preserving their culture, religion, and way of life. Over time, the Circassians developed a reputation for their bravery and commitment. They engaged in countless battles, each time using their knowledge of the mountainous landscape to evade and ambush Russian forces. Despite their valiant efforts, however, the Circassians faced a formidable enemy with greater resources and a relentless drive to expand. Escalation of Russian tactics. As the years went by, the Russian Empire grew frustrated by the slow progress of the war. Determined to bring an end to the conflict, the Russians began employing more ruthless tactics. They adopted a scorched earth policy, destroying Circassian villages, crops, and livestock to force the Circassians into submission. Entire communities were wiped out, and countless civilians were killed or displaced as a result. The Russians also built a series of military roads and forts to restrict Circassian movement, effectively cutting off their ability to move freely within their own territory. These harsh measures marked a turning point in the war, as the Circassians faced unprecedented suffering and displacement. Russian soldiers were instructed to drive the Circassians out of the fertile lowlands and confine them to the less hospitable highlands. Over time, this forced displacement would devastate the Circassian population and weaken their ability to resist. The tragic conclusion of the war. After decades of brutal fighting, the Russia-Circassian War reached its tragic conclusion in 1864. By this time, the Circassians had been worn down by years of warfare, displacement, and loss. Many had been killed or driven from their homes, and their communities were fractured. In May 1864, the Russian Empire declared victory over Circassia, effectively marking the end of the war. For the Circassian people, however, the end of the war did not bring peace. Instead, they faced mass deportations and exile. Russian authorities forced hundreds of thousands of Circassians to leave their homeland and resettle in the Ottoman Empire. This forced migration, often conducted under harsh and deadly conditions, resulted in countless deaths. The Circassian diaspora began, with survivors settling in various parts of the Ottoman Empire, including modern-day Turkey, Syria, and Jordan. Legacy and lasting impact. The Russia-Circassian War left an indelible mark on the Circassian people and their identity. The conflict and subsequent exile became central to Circassian history, shaping their collective memory and cultural identity. Even today, Circassians around the world remember the war and honor their ancestors' bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. The events of 1864 are commemorated as a day of mourning known as Circassian Memorial Day on May 21st each year. The Circassian diaspora preserved their language, traditions, and stories, passing them down through generations. Their resilience and determination to maintain their identity have become defining characteristics of the Circassian community. Despite their forced displacement, Circassians continue to celebrate their heritage, and they remain connected to their homeland in the Caucasus through cultural and historical ties. Russia-Circassian relations today. In recent years, there has been renewed interest in Circassian history and a call for recognition of the suffering endured by the Circassian people during the war. Some Circassian activists and scholars argue that the events of the Russia-Circassian War constitute a genocide, given the deliberate destruction of Circassian communities and the forced displacement of their population. They seek acknowledgement from the Russian government and the international community. However, Russia's stance on the conflict has remained complex. While Circassian cultural rights are officially recognized within the Russian Federation, the history of the Russia-Circassian War and the forced exile of the Circassians remain sensitive topics. Efforts to commemorate and acknowledge the Circassian tragedy continue to face challenges. Circassian identity and cultural revival. Today, Circassians around the world are experiencing a cultural revival, reconnecting with their heritage and history. In Turkey, Jordan, and Syria, where many Circassians settled after their forced migration, communities are preserving their language, dances, music, and customs. Circassian youth are increasingly interested in their history and culture, learning the stories of their ancestors and the significance of the Russia-Circassian War. Technology and social media have also played a role in bringing Circassians together, allowing diaspora communities to connect and share their experiences. Circassians have used these platforms to advocate for recognition and raise awareness about their history, fostering a sense of unity and pride in their shared identity. Final reflections. The 152-year Russia-Circassian War is a testament to the strength, resilience, and determination of the Circassian people. It is a story of a small nation that, despite overwhelming odds, fought to defend its land, culture, and way of life. Today, the Circassian spirit endures, and their history serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of preserving one's identity and heritage. This legacy of resilience and pride lives on, inspiring Circassians around the world to keep their culture alive and honor the memory of those who fought bravely for their homeland.